For half a century, Bluebird's taxis have been, well, they've been an absolute icon on Indonesia's streets. A real legacy brand, a name everyone knows. But what happens when a giant like that gets slammed by a digital revolution and a global pandemic all at the same time? Well, it turns into a story about facing not one, but two huge transformations. And honestly, it's a masterclass in how to survive. So that's really the big question we're tackling here, right? How does a 50-year-old taxi giant, a real institution, manage to survive not just the pandemic, but the entire digital age? First, they had to deal with the rise of these powerful ride-hailing apps. And then, bam, a global pandemic brings the entire world to a screeching halt. Their response? It was to transform, not just once, but twice. Okay, so first things first, let's set the stage. To really get their comeback story, you have to understand just how important Bluebird is in Indonesia. I mean, this isn't just any taxi company. It's a household name. And you might be surprised to hear they have a long history of being innovators. Just take a look at this timeline. It really shows that Bluebird has always been a pioneer. And if you're thinking of them as some old-fashioned, stuck-in-the-past company, think again. They were using computerized call centers way back in 1994. And check this out. In 2017, they were already working with their main digital competitor, Gojek. This history of adapting, it is absolutely crucial to understanding how they managed to survive what was coming next. And this right here is the context for their dominance. Just look at that number for car ownership in Indonesia, only 4%. Compare that to its neighbors. That is a massive, basically untapped market for mobility services. And for decades, Bluebird pretty much owned that market. So you've got a market leader, a history of innovation, and a massive ready-made market. They should be unstoppable, right? Well, that's when a perfect storm of challenges started brewing. A storm that threatened their very existence. Wow, I mean, the numbers here are just staggering. In the very first year of the pandemic, their core taxi revenue was slashed by more than half. Can you imagine your main source of income just evaporating almost overnight? That was the immediate, brutal impact of the lockdowns. And this wasn't just one crisis hitting them. It was a classic 1-2 punch. First, you have the digital disruptors, right? Companies like Gojek and Grab. They completely changed the game. Then, just as Bluebird was starting to adapt to that, the pandemic hit, wiping out up to 70% of their revenue in those first few months. This wasn't just a problem. This was a genuine existential threat. So how in the world do you fight back against something like that? Well, Bluebird's first answer was to lean into the disruption. Instead of letting technology replace them, they decided to become a technology company themselves. This was their digital transformation. And they centered their entire strategy around this really powerful concept called mobility as a service, or MaaS for short. The idea is actually pretty simple. Stop thinking of yourself as just a taxi company and start acting like a complete mobility provider. Everything you could possibly need, all accessible through one single digital door. And here's how they put that big MaaS vision into practice, with something they called the 3M strategy. It's all about making themselves indispensable. So multi-product means you can book a taxi, sure, but you can also rent a car or even get a package delivered. Multi-channel means you can find them anywhere, on their own app, on Gojek's app, by calling them up, or just hailing them on the street. And finally, multi-payment means you can pay however you want. The goal here was simple but brilliant, to be everywhere for everyone. But here's the thing, just going digital wasn't enough. At the same time, Bluebird launched a second major transformation, and this one was all about sustainability. And I want to be clear, this wasn't just some PR move to look good. They baked it into the absolute core of their business strategy. The first part of their sustainability vision is called Blue Sky. This is all about the planet, the environment. They're laser-focused on cutting emissions and waste, and the big ways they're doing that are through their really groundbreaking adoption of electric vehicles and by installing solar panels at their depots. Then you've got the second pillar, Blue Life, which is all about people. And this goes right back to their founding principle that their employees are their most valuable asset. They've seriously backed this up too, providing over 36,000 scholarships for their employees' families and helping out with community aid, like organizing COVID-19 vaccinations during the pandemic. And the final piece of the puzzle is Blue Cores, and this is all about governance. It's their promise to run the business responsibly and transparently. This focus on doing things the right way has earned them a ton of awards, and it really helps ensure the long-term health of the company. And they didn't just talk about it, they put a hard number on their commitment. Their 50/30 vision is a public promise to slash their emissions by half by the year 2030. Now, this isn't some vague corporate speak, it's a concrete, really ambitious target. And it drove one very big and very expensive decision. Yeah, this commitment led them to make a huge bet on electric vehicles. And you have to understand, this was not an easy choice. At the time, a single EV cost up to 5 times more than a standard taxi. For a business that's built on efficiency, the math just didn't seem to make sense. It was a massive financial gamble. But Bluebird was playing the long game. They knew that to make EVs work, you can't just buy the cars. You have to build an entire ecosystem around them. I mean, this training material here shows just how deep they went, teaching their drivers and mechanics everything from how to charge the things to how to maintain them. They took what looked like a financial risk and turned it into a whole new capability for the company. Okay, so with these two massive transformations, digital and sustainable, in full swing, what does the road ahead actually look like for this Indonesian icon? How do they balance the old with the new? This chart right here reveals their central challenge. Even during the peak of the pandemic, when you'd expect everyone to go digital, more than half their bookings still came from offline sources, like the call centers and just hailing a cab on the street. It tells you they can't just go digital only. They have to serve their loyal traditional customers and this new generation of app users. It is a very delicate balancing act. So here's their game plan to manage that balance. They're investing a ton in the tech behind the scenes, integrating all their systems, moving to the cloud, and using AI to make their dispatch system way smarter. But that last point you see there, that's the key. They know that all this cool technology has to serve their core value of human connection, not replace it. And that brings us right back to this powerful quote from Bluebird's founder. You know, after all the talk about AI and cloud migration and EVs, it all comes down to a single word: credibility. Their leaders believe their future doesn't really depend on the next cool app feature, but on the trust they've been building for 50 years. These twin transformations, they aren't about becoming a totally new company. They're about finding new ways to deliver on that original promise.